Tune in to sa.neter, subscribe to sa.neter. I was on the couch watching sa.neter. Peace to the netches, peace to the prophets. He brought them all together, he's the Don King of knowledge. Learning information you cannot get from a college. Never knew a day it would be cool to be conscious. I was on the topic, loving the debates. Now we got the conferences to serve another plate, so you can get your food for thought and enjoy the pleasure. Red, black, and green, I'm on the way up to the lecture. It's all for the better, knowledge is a treasure. A legend to the game, the one and only sa.neter. We do it for the people, we do it for the fam. sa.neter Studios, Black News 102. Special shout out to the HOK. The house of consciousness is all the same. We do it for the people, we do it for the fam. sa.neter Studios, Black News 102. Special shout out to the HOK. The house of consciousness is all the same.
Do it for the people. Oh, sa.neter TV. Oh, we do it for the people. Oh, yeah. sa.neter TV.
Like the video, thumb up the video.
Jumbo, Ashe, all the greetings of love and light to the darkest minds of the light and to the House of Consciousness audience. Today, I appreciate you all tuning in to watch this very, very much well-awaited interview with Dr. Professor David Eltis, one of the co-founders of Slave Voyages database. And so Dr. Eltis has been discussed very much in our community because of his research and work. First, I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Eltis, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
All right. And we are going to discuss not only your database and your research, but also your newest work, The Atlantic Cataclysm, Rethinking the Atlantic Slave Trade, and how you go into more of a comprehensive, in more detail about why slavery and why it began, why it ended. So once again, I know I said thank you. I can't thank you enough for being here. Let's start from the beginning, though, for those who aren't familiar with you. What inspired you to actually embark on the endeavor of setting up a database for such as the Slave Voyages database? What inspired you?
There's been in the 1950s and 60s, and I go back that far, there was a lot of discussion about the volume of the slave trade, and it was obvious that estimates varied very, very widely. So my initial interest was really in trying to pin down an amount which would be more consistent with the sources. And I was inspired at the time by a historian called Philip Curtin, who wrote The Atlantic Slave Trade, a Census. And basically, he did some work which he sent to me in the form of 3,000 IBM punch cards. And for those who don't know what those are, one card was punched for each voyage. And he sent me this large box. And I didn't know what to do with them. But I did take them to the computer center, and they generated information on, to be precise, 2,313 slave voyages. And the first 2,313 voyages in our transatlantic slave trade database, now numbering 36,300, actually are there because of those punch cards, which arrived 60 years ago. And since then, I've been able to add, along with many colleagues, I have to stress that this very much is it's not even a collaborative project, it's a community project, because we actually encourage people to submit data, which we take and evaluate, and if it checks out, we include it. So it's a database which is constantly moving. There's always little edits going on. Sometimes those edits are quite large. And I think that's what makes it kind of unusual. Most databases are simply put out there and sit, obviously for the use of the public, but not necessarily refreshed on a regular basis the way ours is.
Okay. Did you have more to say? Because I wanted to ask you a question on that.
Sure, go ahead.
So how much of your database is attributed to the actual contribution of families?
Oh boy, that's very hard to estimate. The basic contribution comes from those people who have gone to the archives looking for slave voyages. The sad thing about it, the database, is that it's not really possible to trace family history back to it. We do have the names of nearly 100,000 Africans who were forced into the traffic, but those names are clearly African, and it's very hard to get a link with what happened on the other side of the Atlantic, because of, as you probably know, African names were wiped out and replaced with other names. Obviously, the enslaved themselves had some impact on this, but it's almost impossible to trace a name which was changed on the Americas side to the database that we've got, as I mentioned a minute ago, almost 100,000. But if you want to see the original names, that's the place to go.
You know, that takes us back to your newest book for me, because you do mention in not just your newest book, but in your past writing and teachings, that there is a wiping out of all the information of the ancestry of a whole group of people. Can you speak to us from that side, how impactful that actually, as a historian, how impactful that is on a group of people not knowing who they are or where they came from?
I mean, there are individuals that we can track, like Bencher Smith, for example. But I think probably the best that we offer, and this is much more recent, is a means of identifying the origins of people that were pulled into the slave trade. And we can do this because we've got this data bank of nearly 100,000 African names, and those names obviously have links to particular ethno-linguistic groups in Africa. So it's now possible, at least for the late slave trade, that's from about 1800 on, it's now possible to actually construct a diaspora of some African languages, for example, Yoruba or Igbo or Mende. And of course, a large component were Muslim, and the Muslim names stand out,
Right.
as you might imagine. So we can offer not just volume numbers linking Africa with the Americas, but actually ethno-linguistic identities. And these identities are actually included in a new version of the Slave Trade Atlas. I'm not sure if you know of the Atlas of the Transatlantic Slave Trade.
Of course, I was going to ask you something about that, but you created the Atlas.
Yeah, there's a second. We've been working on a second edition of that, and it's now in press. And it'll come out, I think, in October or November this year. And it's published by Yale University Press. And it actually provides actual connections across the Atlantic, but also with the origins, the ethno-linguistic origins. And that's something new. We've got about, I think, a dozen maps showing these patterns. And they'll be included in the second edition of the Atlas.
So now we can actually see ethno groups, African ethno groups, where they actually were delivered onto the into the Americas.
That's right. For years, of course, it was possible only to make links from particular ports of departure in Africa with ports of arrival in the Americas. And we could do a little more than that in terms of what happened to people after they were taken off the slave ships. But this new work that I'm talking about actually allows a connection on the African side with the point of origin and its connection to this slave port, where, of course, the slave ship took over.
Oh, wow, that is awesome, because people are asking questions about how many actual African ethno groups are in, even just speaking about the United States. Can we even know, is there an estimate of how many different African ethno groups are present in the Americas, specifically US? Yeah,
I think it's beyond the possibility, because you have to understand that Nigeria alone has 330 separate languages. And what we've got is data on the big ones, the ones I just mentioned. And it's possible to search for the smaller ones, but I would say I'd be surprised if we had as many as 50 out of those 300 just on Nigeria alone. So it's an improvement, but it's certainly not ideal.
Oh, wow. So when we talked to you, or actually I say some people have spoken to you in the community that I'm in, the information community. Yeah. And, they go back and forth about the numbers. I have heard you say that the numbers at first with the initial research the numbers were so low. And so if we're gauging from the number that was estimated with the 9 million up to what we hear about the 100 million, you came to the conclusion that with your data, 12.5 million.
Yeah, maybe a little more. It's probably a bit more than that, but less than 13 million, I think.
Okay, less than 13.
We do have, as you probably know, 36,300 voyages included.
Yes.
And we think there's various ways of checking, but I think we can safely say that we're not far off an accurate figure in that. Yeah.
You're closing this data gap with all the work.
Yeah, I mean, 100 million was bandied around in the 1950s, but it's just not plausible.
Talk to me and the rest of the audience of your research and your methodology compared to others. Show us the difference in how yours is so effective and so accurate compared to the other methodology that was used by other researchers.
Well, we've been able to check accuracy by carefully looking at the data of slave trade voyages. Let me give you an example of the French case where
Yes.
When a ship came back to port after delivering its human cargo, the French authorities would ask the captain what he had seen on the ocean. And the captain would list other vessels, most of them slave ships. We then checked out the names of these vessels, and we found that, in fact, almost all of them were included in the database already. So, in other words, we don't think that the French numbers are wrong. We think there's a good statistical basis for saying this is how many. And we repeat that exercise with the others, like the French and the Portuguese, because there was a lot of interaction between slave traders, a lot of voyages leaving Africa, obviously. And to have a record of just a note of what these vessels were, who they were, makes it possible to come up with the figure that we've got. In other words, I don't think there's room for saying 100 million anymore.
Wow, that is fascinating. Thank you so much for giving me that back detail on how you checked your data with other resources that were reliable, other records. That's amazing. I love that.
And some of these voyages have 17 or 18 sources. I mean, you have some of them, of course, just have a single reference to support what it contains, but for the most part, we've got multiple sources, and that also encourages us to say definite things, like probably not more than 13 million.
Well, speaking about these 13 million Africans, I want to clarify with my audience from you that you are clearing up the whole, how do I say it, maybe myth that the slave trade was primarily, the ones who benefited the most were British, or, you say, okay, it was the Portuguese. And I don't think that has been prevalent out there. That when I think of slave trade, I think, British and Spanish. But you say Portuguese.
Well, I think you can divide it into the North and South Atlantic. The British and the French and the Dutch were obviously big slave traders.
Yes.
They operated in the North Atlantic. And I would say that probably 80%, if not 90%, of the research that's been done on the slave trade has focused on the North Atlantic. Now we know that, partly because of the slave trade database, that in fact the South Atlantic was more important. And this has not had anything like the same attention that the North Atlantic gets.
Yes.
Now, for the US, the North Atlantic is obviously central. It's important. And you wouldn't, US historians have typically not gone south of the equator to see what was going on there. Partly because not many ships from the South Atlantic came to the US.
That's fascinating. I have before had discussions about the slave trade, how it affected South America and also other outside of the United States. You in your speeches and your writings, you say, compared to, and it seems almost unethical for us to make comparisons about people, because these are human beings, but it's important. It's important to know this data. We have around 400,000 compared to millions in South America?
Yes, that's the case. And I think one of the problems with what's been written over the last 40 years is that it hasn't taken into account what happened to captives after they arrived in the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, many of the people that were taken away from Africa had to face a second voyage. So you have what's called the inter-American slave trade, the traffic. And in the case of the US, probably 15% of all arriving in the US, first of all, had to sail from a Caribbean island to one of the US ports. And the inter-American slave trade is only now coming to light. We do have a separate database on slave voyages, which allows you to see this traffic. And most of it was actually not to the US, but to the Spanish and Portuguese Americas. So when people look at the French and the British slave trade, that's just part of the story. There's a movement beyond the British and French islands to other parts of the Americas. Which doesn't get recognized.
Excuse me. I want to clarify that, because what you're essentially telling us and what your researchers are showing us, that yes, we see the let's say the 400,000 came from Africa or from other ports to the American ports, but we have an inter.
It's intra-American, yeah.
You know that, okay, I get it, because it's when we say intra, because it's from within the Americas already.
That's right, yes.
So Dr. Eltis, I know you're probably going to say you don't know, but can you give us even an idea of, you're scratching the surface, but from the Americas, the South, from South America to North America, what numbers are we looking at so far? What do you have so far showing us the importation of slaves from, within the Americas?
Well, most of the traffic was not to the US. It was to, as I already mentioned, the Spanish Americas, and to a lesser extent, Brazil. But there's a book by Greg O'Malley on the inter-American traffic, and I think his numbers are pretty good. And he says that on top of the 400,000, which came directly, you can probably add 15%.
15% of the ones in, what do you mean 50%?
Well, 400,000 plus another 15% that came from other parts of the Americas to the US.
Okay. So we can say we can add another 50,000?
So, yeah, 60,000, yeah.
60,000? Okay.
Yeah.
That's important. And I appreciate that we are looking at all the entire slave trade, not just the US, but of course, this is for people of my, I am of African descent, right, and African slave descendancy. So we want to know, at the end of the day, it's a desperate, I'm getting a little emotional. It's a desperate search for who we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you should keep in mind that the movement from Africa to the Americas is better documented than the move from Europe to the Americas. I mean, you might think the information is pretty scanty, but in fact, it's greatly superior to what we might call free migration from Europe to the Americas. We just don't have the same depth of information.
Right. And I do remember you making a statement that is it before the 1860s? Before 1860,
Well,
everyone.
yeah,
go ahead.
Before the 1830s, something like the majority of people coming to the Americas were African, not European.
Wow, you say every 1 million to Europeans to 4 million Africans.
Yeah, that's about that. Yep. That's down to 80. Of course, the 19th century changes it. First of all, the slave trade is under pressure to end. And secondly, of course, there's mass migration from Europe, especially the Irish and, well, Germans, all nationalities. And most of that comes in the 19th century. Of course, that changes the picture. But down to 1820, Africa was basically the place that people came from.
Wow. So it is fascinating. I don't know if it's just like not being able to see the forest for the trees, but it's fascinating the amount of Africans that what does that say, in your opinion? What does that say about the foundation and because in America, I'm talking about the United States, it's always like, this is the founded on the European forefathers and all this good stuff. But it's really it was the majority African migrants, even if they were forced.
Yeah. No, that's in fact the case. And it's true not just in the U.S., but obviously in other parts of the Americas too.
Wow.
So including Brazil. It's a dramatic difference which historians really haven't taken on board. The history of the U.S. is still the history of European migration.
And that is the part that when I said people maybe can't see the forest for the trees, that makes such a difference. Of course, I'm going to ask you about the indigenous people. So in our community, I need to clarify this, Dr. Eltis, because there are people trying to find out who they are and constructing, unfortunately, a history. And I'm not saying that in a light way or even mockingly, because it's a real devastation. It's a real trauma. So talk to us about, first off, the indigenous people, meaning Native Americans, because I've heard you say people have interviewed you and they ask you Black indigenous. And from what I've taken from you, you mean African-born, African people who are on the shore, on the land of the Americas, born there, and therefore they are indigenous. Am I correct, or can you clarify that?
Well, indigenous can be used in more than one context.
Right.
Indigenous
I need
people,
you to clarify for us.
I mean, indigenous, the way I use it anyway, typically means people who were born or descended from those that were already in the Americas when the Europeans arrived.
Okay.
And of course, there's a separate history of exploitation and how those numbers interacted. But clearly, if African peoples arrived, they become indigenous in the sense that they have children who are just like immigrants today, part of the national scene. So it depends how you use the term indigenous. For me, at no point did I mean to suggest that Africans had arrived somehow in the Americas before the slave trade started. That's not credible.
Thank you. And even though you have clarified that, let's talk about, if I could switch from the word African or the title African for a moment, Black people of the phenotype, such as mine,
Yeah.
who match the phenotype of African people.
Yeah.
These type of people, do you have any information and research that people of that phenotype who match African phenotype, but we're not using the word African, just the phenotype, were they in the Americas prior to European and prior to the slave trade?
No. It's a short answer. I mean, the argument against Africans arriving before Columbus is really down to the fact that the native population of the Americas, indigenous, had been here many, of course, thousands of years. And when the Europeans arrived, there was a devastating impact in terms of illness and death, quite apart from any attempts to force people to carry out labor. Just the fact that there was a set of microorganisms which were common in the old world. By that I mean Eurasia.
Right.
And to my mind, if there had been African contact before Columbus, there would have been a dramatic impact on the population. In other words, they would have had exposure to these new organisms before the Europeans arrived. And there would have been an impact on the population. And there would have been signs of this. But there isn't. It's clear that the dramatic impact of microorganisms came after the Europeans and Africans arrived. Because, of course, Africans, too, were bringing their own set of old world microorganisms with them.
Mm-hmm. So going back to, I appreciate this. I've seen a couple of interviews where I don't know what could be going through your mind, where you're like, but I'm kind of laughing, but I shouldn't laugh, because you get to see the way, the devastation and what the slave trade has done to a group of people.
Yeah.
But I have to believe it or not, I have to ask you again, when you say these indigenous people, because what the group of people that I'm discussing, they want to totally displace or just take over what we know as the people who came through the Bering Strait, the people, they say, no, they are not the indigenous people. They are Europeans and Asians. Only Black people of Black phenotype who are the same phenotype of Africans, they were the people. So even though in your logical, intelligent mind that hasn't been traumatized says, oh, I'm saying African, I'm saying indigenous, they hear that and they still use the cognitive dissonance and say, so I need to, if you would just indulge me, and I want to get back to asking more really great questions. Were these people who we know as indigenous, as far as scientific record, were these people Black people who we know as Africans, or were they the people who we know who resemble the Native Americans of today, the Navajo, the Apache,
Yeah, I think the latter.
Please clarify.
There's no evidence.
I hate for you to seem like you're on the stand, but you are so reliable, and you are. So I just need you to say.
There's no evidence of anyone arriving in the Americas and noting the existence of Black people. I mean, that to me has to be of some importance, because there's a lot of sources and literature based on those sources describing what people were like when the first Europeans arrived. And nowhere in that set of sources is there any indication that the indigenous people, as you say, descended from those that came through the Bering Strait. There's no indication that they were black.
Thank you.
They clearly weren't white, but they were certainly not. There's no evidence at all of an African component in their makeup.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much. Now, I want to again get back to speaking about your latest book, Atlantic Cataclysm, Rethinking the Atlantic Slave Trade. And that is such a poignant title, because not only do we talk about the traumas at the very time it occurred, they are lasting for millennia. Well, yes, they're lasting for centuries.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit more about that from a humanitarian point of view, if you could.
Well, I think that probably the first point to keep in mind is that slavery was not confined to the Americas.
Nope.
I think it's likely that the majority of enslaved people did not live in the Americas. Even when the Civil War started, and there were almost 4 million African Americans in the U.S., this was basically a minority of the slaves that lived in the world at that time. I think you do get a slave trade in the other direction, i.e. from East Africa to different parts of the Indian Ocean.
I don't want to, I'm sorry, I have to jump in. You're speaking because you talk about the exclusivity and the uniqueness of Africans. So when you say slave, you're talking exclusively about Africans, correct?
No, I'm talking about slave people around the world.
Oh, okay, so
what I'm saying is a slightly controversial point, which is that despite the millions of enslaved people in the Americas, they comprised a fairly small portion of the global quota or global total of enslaved people. And and in fact, of course, we've still got elements of slavery today. And given the huge population increase, those numbers are quite high compared to the historic figures. But what I'm doing is making a broader point, which is that slavery was common around the world. What was not common was the systematic exploitation. There was no equivalent of the plantations, whether in the U.S. South or in the Caribbean or Brazil. There's nothing quite like those in terms of the exploitation of individuals. But it's nevertheless worthwhile to just bear in mind that there's a large world out there outside the U.S., and that tends to get forgotten.
Yes.
Slaves were common in the Mediterranean. There were even white slaves in North Africa. The majority of slaves were almost certainly female, not male. And they lived in a wide belt of Eurasia, going from Portugal in the west to China in the east. And I think the research on those individuals is quite shallow. It's nothing like the attention that we've given to the transatlantic slave trade and its implications. And
may I ask you, is that because of what you mentioned, how the treatment and how horrific the plantation slave trade practice was?
No, I think it's because we've got data on the transatlantic slave trade. all you need is 5 or 6 languages. What we don't have is an exploitation of the sources in other languages, especially those in the East. And there's a broader picture, is what I'm saying, which I don't think people fully appreciate.
Right. There is a broader picture. And from the perspective of someone who's looking at the slave trade and the industry that people are benefiting from today, I would think that is why we focus on the slave trade so much. As that I want to talk to you. So you give us some numbers on the billions of dollars that were accumulated from the transatlantic slave trade in the Americas, just in the Americas alone. Can you do that for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible to. There's quite a literature on the rate of return, precisely because many of the documents are business documents. They're obviously people organizing a venture, and there has to be agreements and lawyers, and we've got records on those. We don't have the equivalent of that elsewhere. So it's I'm not sure that the sort of Western branch of what I'm talking about to the Americas was more profitable than what was happening elsewhere. It's just that we have better records of it.
I see.
But yeah, people have profited from slavery for many centuries, and indeed accepted slavery as an institution as perfectly normal.
Of course, we know this, but
the staggering thing is how that changed in the 19th century.
How so? When you say it changed, are you saying industrial wise?
Yes, it changed in the sense that people became conscious that slavery was perhaps not the best way to go about setting up your relationship with people. And that's something that's very recent. So,
I mean, I think we've actually, there's a difference between employer and slave, and even if we could actually go into, I mean, if we could go into again, I do want to come back to, I understand slavery is broad and it's been around since the beginning of time probably, but I would like to talk about the uniqueness of the commodity that was an African during the 1900s, especially, well, prior to the 1900s, like let's say from 16th century, right, to the 18th, 17th. Yes. What do you say? 19th.
Right.
I'm throwing out all these dates because I mean, who really, but like the data you have doesn't say everything because, as you said, slavery is still going on now. Yeah. But back to what I said, the uniqueness, because I do want to hone in on the indigenous people, the Native American natives, American Indians, what they're called, and the African slave. Can you talk to us more about how it was more lucrative and much more efficient to get a slave, an African slave, as opposed to using the indigenous slaves, which were a reality?
Well, yes, that's quite a difficult question to answer, but you have to keep in mind that the Americas generally had a great abundance of land and very few people. It was the most lightly populated continent in the world. The indigenous people had obviously occupied pretty well all of it. and indeed had set up their own systems of slavery, like the Aztecs and the Incas. And actually in my area here in BC, which was quite an important part of the indigenous slave system. But there was from the standpoint of an employer or a European, there was a shortage of labor. And that was based partly, and this is an element that's not recognized sufficiently, it's partly on the fact that white people did not want to come and work on the plantation. They attempted a kind of substitute for slavery called indentured servitude.
Yes, sir.
But this was temporary, obviously, and it was never heritable. Any offspring of an indentured servant was not an indentured servant. It was a free person. So we're faced with a situation where, from the employer standpoint, we've got this vast continent, many resources, no labor. And that's the core cause of the transatlantic slave trade. In effect, white people contributed to the enslavement of blacks, not so much by buying them and selling them in the Americas, but by refusing to come to the Americas. Before the 19th century, I know there were thousands of people, thousands of immigrants, but it was a very small number compared to what employers in the Americas wanted. And that's why the slave trade began. So the cause of the slave trade in the very broad, very long-run picture was the fact that America was underpopulated by the standards of the rest of the world.
And then we had the indigenous, the Native American people who, although there was an attempt and there definitely was slavery.
Yes, certainly. They were enslaved. Yeah, they were enslaved at the beginning, but the numbers were just not sufficient.
Can you give us just a ballpark of the numbers and date, like a date, like when they said, when the Europeans were like, this isn't working, we need some different people, like.
It's right from the start, really. The first return voyages by Columbus actually comprised indigenous people taken as slaves and sold in Spain.
Yes, sir.
But that was very unusual. It obviously became apparent very quickly that there was a real shortage of labor, just as it became pretty obvious that people were not willingly going to the United States, going to what became the Americas to find jobs. Whatever the horrible conditions in Europe were, they were preferable to what could be faced on the plantation anywhere in the Americas.
Wow. For Europeans?
Yeah.
Wow. That's something else that we need to look at more. We don't think about that, but you're right. There was some cannibalism going on with the early settlers. So it was rough. You're right about that.
Yeah. But even after that, I mean, right down the great influx of European migrants is beginning around 1840, 1830 maybe. Before then, it was, wages were just higher in the Americas than they were in Europe, but that didn't attract a sufficient number of people. So the employers reverted to enslaved Africans.
I want to ask you about, that's very interesting. I might, if you can, bring you back for another interview because I want to touch on more about the settlers, but I do want to ask you about the textile business. And when did it become okay, we just need to start developing this land in the United States to, this is a booming business. Come on, we're making billions. When did that happen, and how did slavery affect that, or vice versa?
Oh, it has a big effect. It's first of all, note that the big textile innovations were taking place in Asia rather than Europe or the Americas. The difference, the centrally important fact was the ability to grow cotton and use that as the basic textile, and that's late. It's I mean, the cotton gin is what, 1795.
Eli Whitney, yes.
Yeah, so it's 1800. After 1800, it becomes feasible to grow cotton on cotton plantations and create textiles from that source. But you just don't see any cotton textile before that point. Was probably Asian.
So did the United States become the empire of? Did they take over, and at what time? And was it because of slavery?
Yeah, for sure. It's I mean, before 1800, the big crop that people were anxious in Europe to avoid was the sugarcane business. The major, well, several sources, but sugar and gold and silver in the Americas. They were obviously the reason why you had slavery. But
and tobacco?
Tobacco, yeah, of course, but it was tobacco is not hugely important.
Okay.
Even though it was critical to the Chesapeake. So cotton really did change the picture. And the interesting point was that just as the potential of cotton was emerging, the slave trade was ending. In other words, there was a ban put on slave trading in the U.S. from quite an early date, and although the laws were broken from time to time, really in the 19th century, very few voyages after 1807 anyway carried people to what was now the U.S.
What was the Clotilda one of those illegal slave trading ships? It
was indeed, yeah, the Clotilda, yeah. And the Wanderer, of course, was a second well-known voyage just before that. But they were exceptions. This is, they had between them maybe 500 people on board. Ships going to Cuba at that time would have 1,500. You even have one steamship with 2,000 people on board, 2,000 Africans on board.
Steamships?
Yeah, we've got records in the database of I think it's 30 or 40 steamships. I mean, this was a modern business. And, the ship arrives, people get put on trains. It was fully embraced by the modern economy.
Wow. And this information is available in your database.
Yeah, you can pick out all the steamships. We have a code for them. And they look pretty modern. We have images of them in the 1850s and 1860s.
You brought up Cuba. Were there slaves brought from African slaves? I want to be clear on that for our community. Were there African slaves brought from Cuba to the Americas often, and around what time period?
Not really. Cuba was competing with the U.S.
I see.
Let's say Cuban sugar plantations are competing with cotton plantations in the U.S. And more important, the slave trade to the U.S. was officially banned. And while, as I mentioned, there were people that did it anyway, it was very few. Cuba, on the other hand, was wide open. And the last slave ship that arrived there was after the Civil War in the U.S.
What is the number of, excuse me, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
Thank you. What is the number of slaves when we break down the millions? We already know that it's compared to the other regions, the Americas are minuscule compared. So what would you say the largest population of slave imports, what country or what region, and can you tell us the largest, and where? What I'm trying to say is, who was it? Brazil? I already know what you're going to say, but Can you talk to us about that in the Portuguese? So,
well, you're right, it was Brazil.
I tried to set it up, but I just want you to tell us about Brazil and how.
Well, the thing about Brazil is it's the closest part of the Americas to Africa, which explains the importance of the South Atlantic. And the Portuguese, of course, were heavily involved in that traffic. I would say maybe 5 to 10% of the literature, the scholarly literature, is on Brazil, but probably 60% is on the U.S. And yet Brazil accounts for what, 5-6 million people, compared to 400,000 in the U.S. So the scholarship is just out of whack. So, as I say, Brazil was closer to Africa. It also had a unique system of slave trading in the sense that it would use black people to crew the slave ship.
Wow.
And even more surprisingly, some of those people were actually enslaved themselves. So you have Portuguese vessels sailing from Brazil to Africa, crewed by black people. Even the odd captain was black, believe it or not. And the reason why it was so successful was partly distance, but it was also the fact that the Portuguese had lower costs. And part of those lower costs stemmed from the fact that they didn't pay wages to the crew members. Instead, they gave them a share of a person on board, so their reward or payment would come when that person was sold in the Americas. That was quite different to the North European system, where everybody got wages, and there were very few black people. I'm not saying there weren't any, but there were very few black people in comparison sailing North Atlantic slave ships compared to what was going on in the South. So we've got this extraordinary position where the outset costs of the Brazilian slave trader were lower than those in the North Atlantic. So it's not just distance, it's also costs. Costs were, it was easier to organize a slave trade venture in the South than it was in the North. And that's something that's not really been picked up at all in the scholarship yet.
Right, and you discussed that in your book that I'm patiently awaiting about the Portuguese system.
Yeah.
This is what you're discussing, and I'm sure no one who's listening to this interview has ever heard that. And
yeah, well, no, neither had I until a few years ago.
Wow, that is really, I need a minute with that one, because what we're looking at is answers. I have heard about the astronomical number of slaves that were just used as just disposable people in South America, in the sugar cane fields
And coffee.
And so now the puzzle, that's an extra piece that fits into the puzzle, saying, okay,
Yeah.
that's why it was so easy to bring them.
Yeah.
Back to Portugal. We know today that they are the poorest, I'd say, or the I guess I could say poorest. The poorest country in the EU.
Lowest
right?
income. Well, yeah, there's a mistake in my book on that.
Or maybe it's Spain.
No, Spain. It's not Spain. What I said was Portugal was had the lowest income of EU members.
Okay, so they are the lowest income. Sorry.
No,
okay,
but that's actually not the case because.
Oh, it isn't. Okay, can you clarify that for us?
Yeah, because I was omitting the Eastern European countries that have joined the EU in the last 10 or 15 years.
Right. Okay. So let's do
lowest,
this.
Lowest of the Western European.
I was going to say that. Got it. So we're back on the same page. And the Eastern European countries did not participate in the slave trade.
Well, except yes and no. They were.
I was going to say, except for, I'm going to get to the part about also the Russian story is really interesting. But talk to, okay, so they did tell us what countries in Eastern Europe that did actually participate.
Well, just think of the origin of the word slave.
Slavs. Oh, yes, Slav. Okay.
So before Columbus,
wow.
Slaves came from mainly Eastern Europe.
Okay.
And that's why the term slave emerged. It's people don't realize that, but it has actually a white origin because obviously those living in the Slavic parts of Europe were white. But everybody used slave as the Slavic areas as a source of slaves.
I see.
Anyway, that's a sideline.
And you know what I appreciate about you. Let's just do a sidebar here. I love that you are very sensitive, not you across the board, and that's important that you include every aspect of the world when it comes to slavery, every portion, I should say. And so you don't. I am in a little bubble here. I admit, and so I appreciate that you do. As a humanitarian, let me ask you about that. When did this become, if it did not begin as a humanitarian project, when did that happen for you where you're more, as I see it, a humanitarian and then a historian?
Well, I go back to the civil rights era.
Okay.
So the 60s were fairly important. My first work was actually on the abolition of slavery. And I moved from that into details of the slave trade subsequently. So I think that's the stepping stone that I used to get into the topic.
Let's see. Okay, just a moment. Sorry about that. I was getting a phone call. So that's when you decided you looked at the civil rights movement, right?
Yeah, and that sort of led me to abolition, and yeah, my first essay was on abolition. It's a pretty terrible essay, actually, and yeah, that was the connection. That was the starting point.
So, yes, you going into abolition, you wanted to actually find out when it
was being abolished. Sorry, go ahead.
No, because when you say abolition, you're referring to the abolition of slavery in the African slave trade.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm trying to, now I'm adjusting to making sure that I talk about across the board, because I know that there was, well, I don't know. I'm going to ask you. From Australia, was there also slavery or a slave trade happening from there to other parts of the world with the indigenous people, or no?
Yeah, something very close to slavery. In Queensland, there was a thriving sugar cane business, and this appeared as an attractive option in the second half of the 19th century. And Australia had the same problem as the Americas. Basically, migrants, mainly from the British Isles, didn't want to go and work in the Queensland sugar business. So they started recruiting people, and I'll come back to that term in a minute, from the Pacific Islands. It was called blackbirding. And basically it was a kind of slavery by another name. People worked there for several years, and the period was often extended, and the pay conditions were very poor or minimal. So they too had the same problem on a smaller scale as the employers in the Americas had. And they solved it in the same way, except that they had to avoid the worst aspect of slavery.
Wow. So this was around what time period?
And late 19th century.
Oh, I
and
see.
Also, I mean, Hawaii had its sugar business too, and they also used Pacific Islanders. So
Wow.
sugar's got a lot to answer for. It's interesting because sugar starts life in the Indian Ocean, and it reaches the Americas very gradually via the Mediterranean. And just at the time slavery in the Americas was abolished, you get similar conditions appearing in Hawaii and Australia. So the sugar business circumnavigated the globe over a period of 2 millennia. And always with a labor force which was under duress. Basically, no one wanted to work in the sugar business, or eventually, of course, in cotton.
Wow. And I look at sugar today, I don't even go near it. But I do want to ask you about another question about abolition, because now we're into the late 1800s.
Yeah.
How did like journalism affect? Because I think you do touch on this in your book. Talk about that, how journalism affected the abolition of slavery.
I think it affected it primarily, to my mind, in the 18th century, when the British press was just a nascent condition. What you find is that the London press in particular was very interested in what was happening on board slave ships. And they were particularly interested in slave revolts, rebellions. So you can see at the beginning of the 18th century, like 1710s, 1720s, you get references to these horrific events on board vessels. But in the course of the century, you can see more and more detail being included. And it's obviously reflecting an increasing awareness on the part of people. And slave rebellions are actually very important. not because they were successful, but they were bringing people's attention to what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And more important, they actually increased the costs of slave trading. People don't realize this, but even a slave revolt that was unsuccessful had an impact, because owners would spend a lot of money on defensive measures. They build special platforms on the vessel. They'd spend a lot of money on keeping people under control, extra crew. And what that does, people don't realize this, but what that does is increase the costs of making a voyage across the Atlantic.
Mm-hmm.
And anything that increases the costs increases the price of the slave. And if slave prices are high, then fewer slaves will be shipped off the coast. So the point about what I'm saying is, you don't have to focus on the failure of slave revolts. You have to focus on their impact. And the impact was, in effect, to prevent probably hundreds of thousands of people actually being taken from Africa to the Americas.
Wow. How many documents do you find of, I mean, not exactly, but were there many accounts of slave revolts? I mean, I've heard of some, but
yes.
in your research, yes?
Yeah, I mean, the database contains records of, I think, between 600 and 700 slave revolts. And these events are usually described in dramatic ways, which indeed is appropriate. But very few people pick up the real significance of slave revolts, which is to basically save a lot of Africans from being pulled into the slave trade.
Right. They were essentially martyring themselves to save others.
They were thinking that, but that was the effect.
Wow. What about that? Takes me back to the topic of the indigenous people, meaning the American Indians. I've heard it said, oh, well, they were hard to enslave because they were so rebellious and they did uprise. Is that correct, or is that a myth? Or
the problem was, well, just think of what I was saying about epidemiology.
yes.
I think that people from the old world, whether it was Africa or Europe, had a better chance of survival under these conditions that you would find on a slave plantation in the Americas.
Compared to the people who are American Indian.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So they were weak and sickly as a people.
Yeah, that's probably exaggerating it a little, but they were more susceptible to an early death.
Do you have how did we know about smallpox and all the disease that was brought here, but in your database when we visit, would there be anything about is there anything that would show? Nothing, just
no. It's enough to take on the African slave trade. We haven't really. There was obviously pretty big traffic from the south of Brazil to the north of Brazil, especially in the early days in the 16th century. But yeah, we don't have any solid information.
So this takes me back to what I heard. I've read of you, a paper I read of yours, that when we, in this context of the conversation, it is the exclusivity of Africans. When we talk about slavery in this aspect, when I'm discussing in comparison to the slavery, we've covered indentured slaves. We've covered, the possibility of a large, significant portion of American Indians being enslaved. So right. For the most part, it's African slaves.
Yeah.
That were most lucrative and a mainstay of
the you never see, I mean, despite the need for labor, you never see instances of a white slave. I've yet to find a case where Europeans are actually enslaved in the sense that their offspring will also be slaves.
Or American Indians in the United States being slaves prevalently.
No, I think there are cases of that.
Yeah, so that's what I want to really specify and be clear.
Yeah.
What would the percentage be of American Indians? Because, well, sidebar, her mother's Native American, and then my grandfather is of slave descendancy. He's African slave. Okay, so I know there's a great, very close relationship between Native Americans and African slaves. But what is the percentage of indigenous Native Americans that were slaves during this period of time where we had the African slave trade?
Or
African slavery, I should say. Excuse me.
Well, what percentage of slaves were actually indigenous?
Native American or American Indian, yes.
Yeah. Very, very few. I don't know what the answer is.
I see. Well, now I've given you another endeavor. Hopefully we can.
Thank you very much.
It's important for a lot of people, and I'm only asking you because you're very well aware that there are people in my community who are African descendants of slaves, but they are saying they're Native Americans. So.
And they also have to take into account the Native Americans that owned African slaves. The Cherokees had a cotton plantation right to the end of the Civil War, for example. It's a complicated picture.
Yes, sir. And my mother and her mother and their grandparents, they worked on the cotton plantations with Native Americans picking cotton.
After slavery or before?
After slavery, but still, there was still ownership there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But my grandmother's mother, they're all Native American, but my grandfather, my mom's dad, he was the son of slaves. So they all picked cotton though on that. And I'm not sure, but from what you just told me, that probably was a Native American owned cotton plantation. Yeah. I just thought they were working on cotton plantations as Native Americans.
Yeah.
So
I'm not saying there's a large number here, but I'm just saying that it did exist.
All right. Well, see, coming from Dr. David Eltis, when you say you're not saying a large number, we know that there's not a large number of United States American slaves, 400,000 that turned into 4 million, but it still was significant. For me, I think I get it compared to all the other numbers that were thrown out. That's very, very small, but 400,000 slaves turned into 4 million, you say?
Yes, it was a quite phenomenal pattern, which you don't find in anywhere else in the Americas except perhaps southern Brazil.
And when you go ahead.
So and the reason, of course, is climate. Basically, the United States had a winter, even in the South, and this killed pathogens. Whereas in the Caribbean and Central America, there was no let up.
I see. That's information that I appreciate. That information that I'm sure a lot of us didn't consider.
Plus, the diet in the U.S. was better.
Diet was better. I was going to get to that. Yeah. The care of the slaves as property was better, correct, in the United States than in South America. I'm not sure
that was true, but yeah. But certainly.
Well, compared to South America, because what I've heard, and I want you to clarify, I've heard that they didn't care if they dropped dead while they were working. Is that not true? Yeah. I'm talking about in South America.
probably the worst conditions were actually in what's now Haiti, which in those days was called Saint-Domingue. Yeah, I mean, in Brazil, you get coffee growing in a region which is not subject to tropical climate. Southeast Brazil is much more like the United States. On the other hand, the sugar growing areas in Brazil in the north were just part of the terrible record of sugar growing anywhere.
So, is there any information on, for lack of better words, breeding systems in the United States that could have attributed to the increase astronomical number of 4 million, or no?
I don't think so. I think it's more it's more along the lines that I've explained in terms of climate. I mean, the interesting thing is that the black population in the 19th century grows at a similar pace to the white population. And the reason is obviously, as I say, a period in the year when pathogens tend to die off, but also better diets. We've got amongst the 100,000 Africans that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk here, we have height measurements, and height is very much sensitive to nutrition. And it turns out that slaves in the US are, in the 19th century, 2 inches taller than Africans who were not taken out in the slave trade. And you get a very similar difference between white Europeans and white North Americans. So the fundamental driver that I'm talking about here is, I think, nutrition and disease.
Nutrition and disease. So how have you come to some, are you closer to closing the gap on the understanding of how 400,000 became 4 million besides nutrition, or is it just nutrition?
Yeah, I don't really work on that area, but I think the explanation is what I've said. The U.S. in the 19th century was just a healthier place to be.
I agree with that. But what I'd like to also clarify, you've been very gracious, by the way, for me with all my clarifying. I'd like to clarify that from you as an expert, just your input, this 4 million that is obvious in the census, that wasn't 400,000. Scratch that. That 4 million does not include Black indigenous people being accounted for. It's talking about Black African progeny of slaves, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate your patience. I do. I really do.
Okay.
Well, just letting you know that we're over a little bit over an hour. I appreciate you so much. We've covered some points in your new book. Again, I will be dropping the link post-production with this. Atlantic Cataclysm, Rethinking the Atlantic Slave Trade. Dr. Eltis has the Slave Voyages database. He's doing a great service for not just the progeny of African slaves, but for the world. And I appreciate you so much for that. Do you have anything to say before I end this particular stream?
Just offer my thanks. Thank you for having me.
No, the thanks is all from our end. And yes, hopefully we'll be able to bring you back after I complete your book. and have more discussions. Because one more thing, Dr. Eltis, I want to mention and have you confirm, if you do take, there are families that contact you with information, correct? With the database, I should say.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. They ask questions that often we cannot answer, unfortunately.
I mean, they contact you with they contribute
Oh,
information.
you mean contribute? Oh, yes. It's a two-way street. Yeah.
So if you're out there and there's some information that you feel is significant, please contact Dr. Eltis and his team. It is slavevoyages.org. It's slavevoyages.org. One last question. You've been very patient, but I do want to ask you: do you work with any Africanists or any groups that are actually African historians? We have an African historian that we work with in this community named Professor Jabari. He's an African historian. Do you ever work with them, those type?
Well, we're very dependent on African historians for information on the ethno-linguistic origins. Going back to the database I mentioned at the beginning of close to 100,000 Africans who were actually taken off slave ships in the 19th century. We've identified probably 36,000 names, and that allows us to make these new maps, which will show up in the second edition of the Atlas. So yes, the answer to your question.
Perfect. Yeah. Because our community, the House of Consciousness, we have so many different African historians that now they know that you're open and always willing to get more information. We appreciate you so much. Once again, thank you. And I will be ending this stream. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And we will see you soon in the House of Consciousness, the toughest environment to be in.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Doctor.
Where you at, Napah? Let's go. Don't end it yet. Yeah. Oh, man. First of all, I want to say to you, you are a blessing. You are a true scholar. I'm proud. A great job, baby girl.
Thank you, honey.
You had a great job, man. You interviewed a grandmaster teacher, a scholar, when it comes to breaking down the African history. I wonder what the Abos and the Indians and them are going to say now, because they are the ones that use him as a reference.
Yeah, that's the whole point of us doing the interview.
So now you're going to say his information don't count now? You can't say that. So, baby, you did a great job. I'm proud of you. You always said you was a better interviewer than me.
Don't do that right now. No, you're the best. You're the best. But I do want to add.
We're a great team. You did good.
Excuse me, my love. Thank you, King. I just want to add this. Thank you, everyone who was here. I agree. I mean, to have him, we wanted to settle something with the information that was being misused, but I love that information he offered. We definitely have to bring him in again. I was on the edge of my seat. I didn't want to keep him too long. He is 85 years old. We were going on over probably an hour and a half. But I want to say there are things that he mentioned, of course, that a lot of us in this community, we know better. I don't have to agree when he says his position about no blacks being here before Columbus. My mission was to show Abos that you should be stop using him as a source, because he is opposed to your information. So that was the point, and I think but
see, Napah, he's right, and the Abos are wrong. He's the researcher.
He is the researcher.
He's the educator. So I want to say, what did you get out of the whole overall interview and what he was saying versus the African slaves and the Abos or the Indians were here and stuff like that? What did you get from that?
Thank you. You heard from his mouth. Very few. You heard from his mouth. No, they were not black people. The indigenous people were not black. Again, this is his source. He's very reliable. For me, I see Dr. Eltis as someone who is doing the research. He's a professional scholar. When it comes across his desk, they vet the information, and then this is what he goes by. He's got a lot of information. The slave voyage database is invaluable to us. So just for us, as far as the progeny of slaves and those who know we deserve reparations, that for me, I got choked up. I'm not kidding. Like, hearing some of the information, like I didn't know the situation about the Portuguese slavers who did the transportation. I didn't know those were slaves. I didn't know that they were bargained with, like, you can get this amount if you go and capture your own. That kind of stuff, really, I had to hold it together. So we're going to have to bring him back. I appreciate him. And I do want to say this. I have seen him on other channels. I love my brothers and sisters as people. I understand that we've been traumatized. I understand that we have PTSS, post-traumatic slave syndrome. A shout out to Dr. Joy Degree. However, seeing so many people who are abos or calling themselves Indians, when they interview him, somebody said, don't ask leading questions. It's like they actually do more talking and leading than actually hearing from him. So shout out to Dr. Eltis, and thank you to the family. Come on in. And
let me ask Papa Draco. You got to turn on your camera. Let me see who you are, man. That's you. Oh, you're the one that been trying to hit my queen up, bro.
What?
Hey,
but go ahead.
You already knew that forever. Why are you already?
I know that.
hey, look,
Just
I
running.
want to ask
I want to roll the screen. Brother, you know that's my queen, right?
what makes his word?
Hold on, brother. Look at me. I'm over here.
Yeah, looking dead at you.
That's my queen, right?
Oh, I know now. I know now.
Before, I'll give you a pass on that. Go ahead, brother.
I know now. All right, look. Well, look. I want to ask, what makes old boy's word king when he was on Sharice's channel? He sided with everything she was talking about. He was on Top Cat channel. He sided with everything Top was talking about. I seen him on the Pan African channel. He did the same thing. Now he's siding with you guys. Why is his word king like that?
Right. Let me answer the question. Because on especially Sharice's channel and the brother Top Cat, when I saw parts of the interview, as I said, it's an interview. People can interview any way they like. But with me, I made sure that I was completely clear and made sure that he reiterated the information where there were no blurred lines. I'm not knocking Sharice. I'm not knocking Top Cat as far as how they can interview how they want. It's their channels. It's their platforms. However, with him as a scholar, here where we are in the House of Consciousness, we aren't biased toward, for me, it's either way. If he came in and said, yes, there were blacks before and they had the phenotype of Africans, but they were indigenous, I would have said that's great. I wanted to show that that's not his position, Copper. That's not his position, and so our people who are indigenous, I'm going to be respectful, our Indian brothers and sisters, our Abo brothers and sisters, must not use him as a source anymore. They don't really, y'all don't need him. You can find other stuff to come out and bring forth, but he is not a source to use in any way, shape, or form. If you want to come at the position that Black people, our people, are indigenous, he does not agree with. I'm actually doing my brothers and sisters a service. He doesn't agree with that at all, Copper. So that's the answer.
I can run with that. So you're saying he's not a source as far as for us to use or for anybody?
Good question. If I say the slave trade really didn't happen, or it happened because we were Indians here already getting enslaved, if that's my position, I must find someone else besides Eltis, because as you see, he doesn't, that's not his position at all. He made it very clear. And so that's the thing I'm saying. He's not the source to use.
Okay, I can ride with that. That's all I want to know. That's all I want to know.
Thank you,
All
brother.
right. All right, 7. What up, man?
Peace to the king and queen of the HOK,
Peace. What's
brother
up?
sa.neter and Queen Napah. I just want to say, man, the interview, you knocked that out the park. It was an incredible interview, Queen,
Thank
and
you.
I appreciate both of you for providing this type of scholarship to us.
And you know, that's
Right?
why I didn't want to come in, Asad, because she done such a great job. I didn't want to mess that up. She done
Oh
good.
man, it was, and you know what's crazy is, people want to talk about what to try to claim that he contradicted himself, but the questions that you asked weren't the questions that they asked, right? And you gave, and you had more clarity in the interview in what you were trying to get through than what they were doing. So I think that's why he had to admit that your interview gave more clarity to the issue than theirs. But what I want to say is what's incredible to me is you all turned the Jabari special of reading a source and turning it into somebody to
Right.
taking an interview and turning it into the sa.neter, the Paul double slap. I mean, it was
Okay.
incredible.
You know what I just said? I just said HOK. I tried to say H. I said the ouch okay because it was an ouch okay cut. To be
Oh,
honest,
oh,
but
we not all over the place,
yeah.
Queen. I mean, the way you guys set this up, it was incredible. I applaud you. You know what I'm saying? And
No,
these
that was
apples need to step their scholarship up. They
Look
need
at
to step
Lord
it up.
Alva. Look what Lord Alva said. Read it, Shadah. Please, Lord Alva.
I want Nepal. I want
Peace,
Nepal
Lord Apple.
you from now on. Saab been asking me the same questions for 10 years. That's only yo, Lord Abba. That's only because I'm trying to see if you change your mind. So I would probably ask you the same question every year to see if you have a change of heart and you still with the Morris stuff, brother. So I might go on for another 10 more years, brother.
Oh yeah, that
We
was
got Cube in the building. First, let's bring on Jones. What's up, Jones? Jones, what's up?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sal, what's up, man? How you feeling? I'm
I'm
good.
good.
I appreciate you having me on. The lady that interviewed the guy, that was a wonderful interview. I just wanted to say
Nepal,
that
Nepal,
first.
Thank you. Thank you, my
I was
friend.
the one. I came on just to let you know. I was the one that gave you the super chat to ask the
Oh, thank you,
question.
brother.
Cause so you didn't really ask the question, but that was cool. I probably the question wasn't understood probably, so it was cool. But I wanted to know if the guy David Eltis, if he ever heard of Anatoly Fomenko, or if he ever heard of a science they got now that they call chronology, which is basically putting historical records and attaching it to real timelines. So that was the question I asked, and I wanted to know his opinion on that.
Okay,
But
well, we will be bringing him back.
yeah,
I do want to mention that he has a new book. Did you say something about Russia in that question?
Anatoly Fomenko, he was a Russian historian. He basically, basically his overall synopsis is basically the timelines is different, is different timelines. So the original timeline we know of, they added 1,000 years to the timeline. So we basically looking in the wrong time periods for historical events, basically. So I just wanted to know if he ever heard of that or he ever ran into that in his research or something like that.
Okay, well, I will let you know that you can take a look at the database website, slavevoyages.org. See if there's anything on there. It's very extensive. There's a lot of details on there. And he does have a new book, Atlantic the Cataclysm. Let me read the entire title for you. The Atlantic Cataclysm, Rethinking the Atlantic Slave Trade. Any new information that he would have,
Right.
or any information on that, maybe on the website, possibly in the book. If not, we will ask him that question the next time we are sitting with him.
All right, appreciate
Thank
that.
you so much for the super chat. And Ben Nisut, thank you for that super chat, the $5 super chat. Thank you so much. I'm glad people were pleased with the interview. I really want to ask him more questions. There may be little things that, of course, we don't. I saw somebody say, so he's going against Ivan van Sertima and our scholars, but the foundation, just the crux of everything, it's a lot that we need. Don't we all agree? Like, we need this information that's on that database. So shout out to him and all of his research team.
So I want to say, I asked the question, was this an informative interview on the slave trade? And 75% yes, 25% nay. No. So we know the 25% is the Indians. We already know that.
Facts.
Of course, it ain't good to them, But bring forth a scholar with a PhD that can debunk them. We don't want no hood, no hood Indian. We want to see some degrees, because you can't go up against him. He's a goddamn doctor. He's a professor. You can't go up against him because you don't know nothing. You just regurgitating what you heard on YouTube. So if you have
your scholarship, the scholarship is so poor that you guys were able to use the interviewer that they tried to use as proof and turn it against them.
Right.
That's ridiculous.
Right. So let's bring on Cube in the building. Cube, what up?
Yo, what's going on, man? What's happening?
All right, we got Cube and Elder Yara this Monday coming.
Yeah, finally, man. Damn. Sorry for the wait.
I'm excited about this. Yes.
Sorry for the wait, man. I apologize. Sorry for the wait. I was under the weather one day, and then it was supposed to be this Tuesday that just passed, but signals got crossed, so we had to reset for this Monday. It's definitely going down. Your brother's about to do what I do. So that's always amazing. But as far as this particular interview, I didn't see it. I'm going to be honest with you. I had a little, but I didn't get a chance to see it. So I'm going to have to go back and watch it. So I can't give you flowers, unfortunately, because
don't worry about it, brother. I'm not worried about it. But Cube, you do know the background on it, don't you?
Right, and that's really why I came on, is to try and get some of that background, because I was trying to gather that with the questions that people were asking, but I didn't gather that. So I wanted to ask you, what was he saying exactly about like the fake Indians? Like, what was he saying about them?
Okay, so the community of Indians and Abos, I'm saying both because I don't know who is what, so I don't want to be disrespectful. The community they have been using this particular scholar, this researcher, as a source to attempt to prove that that there were indigenous people here that were Black, and that essentially that the slave trade was not as we know it. And also some of them are trying to shoehorn, there's an Indian slave trade also. And with all of that hodgepodge and that mash, they brought him in to say, and here is Dr. Eltis saying that there were only there's only 400,000 slaves brought here, but the census showed 4 million. So Q, what they're trying to allude to is the 4 million. If it's only 400,000 slaves, there must be some Black Indians in that 4 million. But
wow, that's what they're saying now?
Yeah, that's what.
So they're saying now that, wow, that's crazy. So if they're saying that if 4 million slaves were brought, are they now saying that some of those people were Indians?
They're trying to, that's what they're using. They're misusing Dr. Eltis and they're trying to say, because his research says 400,000 slaves were delivered to United States, but the census later showed, after reproduction, health, the longevity, there was 4 million in the census. So their position is, so because there's 4 million, see, we know that those aren't Africans. Those must be Black Indians. And that's the issue, why we brought him in. That's why we brought him in.
Lucky, you got to come out the dark. Lucky, you got to come out the dark.
So I guess in I'll try to wrap it up with this because I will watch it tomorrow. I'm off tomorrow, but I
Mhm.
did get off a little bit late. But so what they're saying is because 400,000 came, and then subsequently there was a census. Now that there's 4 million blacks in air quotes, most of those must be Indians.
Yeah, basically.
Okay,
So
so
that's why we brought him in to say, no, stop using him. You're misusing him as a source.
wow, that's crazy because within like 2 or 3 generations, you can get 4 million people off
Thank
of
you.
400,000.
Fact,
Like, so
fact.
that's kind of stupid in and of itself. But yeah, like with
Actually,
this,
faster
yeah, like
because
with
of
this,
forced sex,
Forced
right,
forced
right,
pregnancy.
right, great. But it's
Well,
crazy
and I
because
do want to say, Cube, I do want to say that is not his position. See, that's what I said. My position, and we know it's forced reproduction. Dr. Eltis does not subscribe to that, and he says no. So, see, we're not trying to force our belief or our conclusion onto him. I just want to say that he does not say that there was forced labor, there wasn't a breeding system. He says it was because of health. So go ahead, Cube. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just want to say that
yeah,
he doesn't agree with us on that.
yeah, and that's crazy because we don't even see the census even beginning to take place until the 1800s. So like
Fact.
when they talk about the census, like you're talking about 120 years when black people had already been over here. You see
Right.
what I'm saying? So that's crazy for them to mention that. But I'll say this, man, when it comes to this conversation, it's difficult for me because I know these people are crazy. I know these people are crazy, and
Well,
it's difficult for me to have these conversations with these people because I know they're gonna twist, history and stuff like that. So I'm glad you brought the brother, the older elder, what he is, and we
right.
definitely gonna, well, I'm gonna check him out. And
Yeah.
after I let everybody speak, I definitely want to have a conversation with JJ because I was on the job today and he had a lot to say. He had a lot to say. So yeah, go ahead, y'all.
All
Appreciate it.
right.
Oh, I love that.
Let me go to Mandinka Mali in the building. Mandinka. I said, Mandinka, let's go. Can't hear you, Mandinka.
Talk nice and be, yeah. Well, yeah, this the new me, so I'm talking low, so I don't scare nobody off. But okay, so we had Dr. Jane Elliott on here. You brought her on here. Do you remember her? Somehow?
Of
Yeah.
I remember you
course.
brought her over here. She's a doctor.
Yes.
Right? All right. Now we have Professor James Smalls, ladies and gentlemen. Both of these esteemed people in the community are great researchers. Dr. Jane Elliott is on the record on sa.neter TV saying that yes, Africans were in America before 1492. Now I looked up this brother. I mean, hey, I'm not no disrespect, but all he studied is transatlantic slave trade. Maybe he
Mhm.
didn't go into the other part who was in America before 1619. So Professor James Small on the same page is saying that yes, Africans were in the Americas before 1492 or 1619. So my thing is, I would like to see a conversation between Dr. Jane Elliott and Dr. James. What's this guy name? I can't get his name.
Eltis, Dr.
So
Eltis.
what I'm saying to the audience, yeah, Dr. Eltis, I think that would be a great deal. Both of these people are elders, and as you're older, maybe sometimes your information needs to be updated
Hmm.
because I can bring out like 20 or 30 points to say on the side that we were here. So, and to me, it seems like it's like, well, we weren't smart enough to get here. We only got here because of a transatlantic slave trade. So it's kind of insulting to me, but maybe his research didn't go that far. So I'm not putting him down. I'm just saying, maybe Doc, if you're listening, maybe you should look up Dr. Jane Elliott and Professor James Small, and I lay my plane.
Thank you. And JJ, that's a perfect point right there.
Oh,
They these
yeah, one more
scholars you
thing.
brought up. No, I want to
Yeah,
like elaborate on what you said. The scholars that you brought.
mhm.
Well, I'm going to say Dr. James Small. Perhaps it would be better for the Abos and the Indians to use his information and quote him because, as you agree, the Dr. Elta says no blacks, nobody. So they can't use him as a source to stake their claim, right?
correct.
I'm
That's
asking.
right. That's
I
right.
You're
don't.
right on that. I was saying, but the two, but Dr. Jane Elliott, I mean, was he a professor? Dr. Jane and
He's a
Professor
professor,
Smalls?
yeah, Dr.
Because there's
Eltis.
going to be a pro and con to every. Yeah, they're gonna be a pro and con to every argument, right? So I'm just saying, don't. So we just got to take the information with a grain of salt and continue to do our own research. Don't just take it as an absolute. So that's what I'm saying. So this is the new me. I'm gonna be like just laid back, and then
That's a
when it's time
lie.
to get in the ring, then the
That's a
lions
lie.
gonna get unleashed. But I don't want to scare
That's a
nobody
lie.
off.
That goes
I'm just
against
asking personally.
that goes against your character, bro. It's all right.
What's
Be you. Just have a little discipline. You'll be all right. You'll be all right, Jay. You know, we want the warrior JJ to come out when it's time to come out.
Well, sa.neter, Uncle West talked. I know, but Uncle West talked about him.
Yeah, y'all started talking about each other's mothers,
When
man.
you get to talking about my mama, man, that's
Right.
Oh, he did. He did.
Yeah, let's move forward. We want to keep it clean.
I'm not gonna bring that into this. This is a good
No,
build.
no,
Yeah,
yeah,
let's
thank
keep
you,
it
JJ, because I don't. You're
Hey,
good.
JJ, stay right here because I might need you. I'm bringing on American Lotus right now. American, cam up, man. Let's go. You on the call. There you go. JJ, stay tuned. We might need you, brother.
Yeah, JJ, don't do it. Peace, sa.neter.
Peace, brother.
Let me on. Hopefully, my mic is clear. Peace to Paul. I caught the end of
Can you
the
talk
interview.
up a little bit? Talk up, brother.
I caught the end of the interview. So can you hear me better?
Yes, we hear you a lot better.
Okay, I caught the end of the interview, so I can't really, explain too much or give my hypothesis. But I would like to say that we need to look into white cargo, the Slav story, the story that most people are leaving out, the trans-Pacific slave trade, so we can get a whole story. You know what I'm saying? I'll say this, because I don't believe any of these slave trade narratives, and because I have a disagreement with the source, I say let's put it all on the table. Then let's show the so-called Slav slave. Let's show the real Slav trade, which, by the way, the word slave really comes from and represents the Slav people, and really show the story of the Barbary Coast, where the pirates were kidnapping all those Slavs and selling them and ruling that area and terrorizing all those people since Muley Ishmael. I mean, and then the story of the Lisbon earthquake causing all these catastrophic events and what's going on. All these stories are full of holes, and I think that we need to really examine it and put it to bed, because I find that we have pictures of all these Slavs, these Irish, these Scottish, German, Welsh, Polish, whatever name you want to name, coming over here on boats, but we don't have any of the so-called West African tribes with the transatlantic slave trade in those boats. Still no Clotilda, too, by the way.
Stop. Can I piggyback off American
Yeah.
Lotus real
Yes,
fast?
go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm gonna pose a hypothesis. What if the Atlantic slave trade is the Arab slave trade or the Slavic slave trade? If you want to comment on that.
Let me answer that from just the interview. The information that the Dr. Eltis does, some of the stuff I get it, we don't agree with. But when we're talking about the actual slave trade, that information has been checked by different sources. His methodology is really airtight, so to speak. He talking about ships, watertight, I should say. He's using different sources of historical record to fact check what he and his team have already initially suspected. Though all researchers, we were doing the number 9 million, and then we said 100 million. So they actually are going into different, different slave trader rosters or journals, and he's seeing the information and he's checking it. If you heard the part of the interview where he said with the French, he could look at their particular log of what occurred during their excursions, and those logs were so extensive that they would have documentation of other ships of other countries that were in the water on the seas while they were there. So then he would go to those particular logs of those other ships and see, okay, this matches up. So he's got a great system. With all that said, how could it be Arab or not non-existent? You know what I'm saying? He has record of it. They have record of it. So
that's I understand that perfectly. But what I'm actually saying was who were particularly on those slave ships that came over here, right?
Yeah.
That's
and
the
he
question.
has the French, he has the Portuguese, he has African, even so extensive with the details of the Portuguese slave trade. They know that actual African slaves were manning the Portuguese slave ships. So they have great detail on the information.
That's if you're denoting that Africans were actually black or Slavs. That if you're speaking in that perspective, you're in your mind, you're saying that as soon as you hear the word African, you're automatically thinking they're dark-skinned, melanated people.
And he cleared that up as well. That he cleared it up when I said phenotype. People who are not African but look like African, could it be possible? He said absolutely not.
I'm gonna disagree with that, but I got you.
And you're definitely you should make your own decision. But with him as a researcher with the information, we already knew it. For me, I'm still like, okay, thank you. But if you don't want to agree with that, that's fine. I understand.
The reason I say that because if you go on his website, Dr. Eltis, and he has the trans-American trade, right? He has a section in there that describes the transport between North and South America and Central America, as well as cross the Atlantic from Africa. When you look at those records, they have the complexion and phenotypes of the people that's actually on the ship, right? Some of them were copper. They had a couple of them that said they were copper skin, and they had English names. They didn't have African names.
Right. And if you heard what I said, he talked about that in the interview. He said African slaves, which they have documentation that they were African slaves, were manning these particular, like you said, the South American, were manning these particular ships. They were African slaves who were running the ships and taking in African slaves. So you're right. They were all the same color and they were all African.
Can I ask just a real quick question for the brother Yodi Jones? Because he said that some of these people who were coming over had English names. What was the importance of bringing that up exactly?
No, I was just mentioning not the Atlantic slave part. Like I said, the voyage is the person, Dr. Eltis's website, the slavevoyage.org. It has a section of the transportation of so-called slaves between the Americas. I'm not talking about the part that.
Hold on, just real quick. You said the so-called slaves. What did Dr. Eltis say that those slaves were? Were they African?
No, like I said, I don't think they were African.
According to Dr. Eltis, did he say they were African? That's what he's saying.
Oh, yeah, he said they were African.
Right. So now let me ask you again. What is the importance?
I disagree with that, but.
Well, no, I'm not asking about your agreement or not. I'm asking what was the importance of talking about their names and if they were English or not. What was the importance of that?
Why did he mention that?
Never mind, brother. Well, we can go somewhere else.
All right. I want to ask him, why do you disagree with it? Where's your scholarship at, brother? Do you have any scholarship on this matter? Do you have any degree on historical information?
Well, I read a book on.
No, that's not what I asked you. I said, do you have any degrees on the slave ship, on African history?
On degrees, like college degrees? No, sir. No, sir.
So, brother, how are
I
you
just
going
read.
up
I
against
just no.
Shadah?
I just
How
read
many books
about.
he got, Nepal? He got a few, several.
Well, he has two, but his main body of work is the actual atlas, the slave atlas, and the slave voyage database, which is extensive, and it's actually the mainstay of, if all actually all Black scholarship, all advocacy, everything that has to do with studying, teaching, learning about, working together as a group.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
He says we work, just let me say this. He says we work as a community. Everyone in the world basically is working with Dr. Eltis and his team regarding the African slave trade. So
Yeah,
he's not just a guy who is just sitting
and
there.
that's the problem, Nepal. Here we are with no degrees, with no scholarship on the information, but we quick to disagree, and we can't back that up and prove it. You don't have the scholarship, brother. You are dealing with belief now. Your belief.
Can I say something real quickly? I'm sorry, Yodi, and
No, you good. Go ahead.
I'm gonna let you speak, my friend. Let me tell you what Dr. Eltis said when he was asked a similar question, like how in the chat they're like, "What about the degrees?" And so what? Someone asked him, and I'm paraphrasing. They said, "Do you do any research, or do you use any research from Africanist or Black people who are studying, like in our community, basically?" He said, "Well, to be honest, we wouldn't even have the database to rely on if it was only Black people." He doesn't say scholars, but if it was only Black people putting it together. And I'm going to say that sounds harsh, but I agree, because he's not biased. His team isn't biased. They're getting the information, they're putting it in there. They don't have any stake where they're like, "Oh, I don't want to be associated with throwing up on a ship, and I don't want to be associated with being whipped," and not. They're just putting the information together, and that doesn't mean he's saying that Black people are excluded. He wants to definitely have our information. Like I saw Lord Abba say he'd love to interview him. I would love for you to speak to him, Lord Abba, to contribute to whatever the database. I mentioned Jabari. Anyone that has any information, they will take all information, and if it pans out, it'll stay in that database. So if you contact him and you say, "Look, I think it was all Arabs," throw that against the wall and see if it sticks.
I want Deez to speak next. He's been waiting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Sa. And I just want to congratulate the sister Napah for a most excellent interview. You hit just about all points. You left basically no questions. You basically made them go cry in the car and say that they no longer want to hear from them. I want to say congratulations. I think that just listen to the conversation that was just happening about Black people being here. I think one of our problems is that we treat history and science as if it is a competition. When I stopped doing that, it stopped mattering to me many of the things that some people are fighting for. It don't matter to me if Black people were already here or not, because history is not a competition. If Black people did not get here, perhaps they didn't have a reason to want to be here. They have plenty of milk and honey in Africa. They didn't want to darn be here. So it's not saying that they are dumb. They didn't want to come here. But what was the other point I wanted to hit on is what Saul was just saying, that we have some nerve in our community to say bump what that professional, that guy who's put 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years in. I feel like I don't want to side with that. That is the viewpoint of and I'm not aiming this at anyone, of a foolish person, of a person that will be easily conquered, when you would rather go with your personal feelings than with evidence and data. You will lose every time, because evidence and data are going to kick your butt every time over your personal feelings. But for right now, I just want to fall back
and say beautiful interview. I was cackling and grinning the whole while because they were crying in the car. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dizali. I saw you in the chat. It was funny. Oh, sa.neter, come on in. Say something. Get us grounded.
Okay. You got some people. One person I seen.
You're muted.
You can't mute the cough and then don't unmute, bro.
Yeah, they asked, where is his sources at? Well, his sources is right here. All you got to do is go get it and look at it. It's documented well. He's showing you his sources. Everything that he got is right here in his book. When we talk about sources, people go and get the books and they document it. That's one of his books you can go and check out. And tell him the website again, Napah.
Oh, yes, it is slavevoyage.org. You can get a lot of valuable information. To the brother, I saw Lord Abba again, the brothers who are working on the reparation movement, trying to get us reparations. This is a treasure chest because he talks about the economy as well.
Yes.
You know? There was something he mentioned. I don't want to misquote him. It's always billions and trillions that he talks about when we're talking about the money that was made, and it's that just come on. We deserve reparations. It's just crazy. It's crazy. So, but how are we going to get them? As sa.neter says, how are we going to get them if some of us are saying that we weren't even slaves?
Let me get Coach up in here, and then I got you, Jay. Coach, what up, man?
You forgetting MP? I'm lucky. He been in here since I was.
Oh, right. Damn, I am forgetting MP. Let me go with MP first.
Oh, no, you good. A brother with a champ. He got his finger up. He looked dedicated.
Yeah, bro, you gonna make me ride for you? Then you gonna pass your turn?
I feel him.
Let me get Coach Keith in the building. Yes, go ahead, Coach. Unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to give my support. Say, great job. Napah, you killed it.
Thank you,
Great
brother.
interview. The transitions were great. You made sure you bogged them down on what you were trying to get out, so that was perfect. So you left no room. That's great. But yeah, I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you,
for the
Coach
interview.
Keith. I saw you in the
appreciate y'all.
chat too. I was excited to see everybody involved. It was a great. He had some great information, right, for us as people.
Yeah, for sure.
Put your finger down, JJ. I see you. You're next. JJ is in the building. Let's go, Mandinka Mali, People's Champ. Can't hear you, man. Can't hear you, Mandinka.
Whether
Can I
who
go after
came here
JJ?
first or
Can I go? I want to ask old boy a question.
Hold on. Mandinka, can you speak?
All right. I'm gonna let these guys go, and then I'll go. Go ahead, brother.
Nah, go ahead, Mandinka. I want to hear what you have to say. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah. Lord Abba was in the. I think it was him. He was like, "Well, why is it so important to whether who came if Africans came here before Columbus?" I think it was something like that. Well, the thing is, it's very important because if you eliminate that, you're taking away history. It's just like in the books, the school books now, the African slave trade never happened. They got it now. We were just migrant workers. So that's why I feel it's important that the real history gets out there. To me, that's my opinion. I think it's important. If you take away somebody's history, if you don't know your history, you don't know where you come from. So, and then other people take credit for what you have done. That's my opinion on that. And one more thing, indigenous black men wanted me to say, we're arguing over words like more and black. And these are labels that the winner, the victor gave our people to keep us confused. Like they had Native Americans, then they changed them to black, then they changed them to Negro to keep us confused and not knowing our real history. So yeah, it is important that
Napah,
we know
Yes, sir.
who was here.
I want you to I want you to
I
drop
do.
your cash app. I want to see who appreciate the You never like to do that. You never like to drop your cash app.
I mean,
But I want
they
you to
do
drop
put
your
my
cash
cash
app. I want you to drop your cash app, and I want to see if the people respect and appreciate the interview.
Okay, and you know
5,
what? If
10,
if
20,
one of the
50,
mods will
100.
drop my cash app,
Yeah.
but
I
I
misquoted Lord
I
Adam.
appreciate it.
Sorry,
I
Lord
know I
Adam. That's my
appreciate it.
fault. I
And one more
misquoted
thing,
the question.
JJ, I love the information you gave me earlier. Put my joint on $5 to see who want to come in here now. That's a good joint. I like that, brother. Like that. Good information, Jay.
Yep.
Moderators, all right, we got Napah Shadah Cash App in the building. Can y'all please show some love and donate to my queen, man? For real.
Oh
For
wow.
the great
Okay,
job
thank you. I
that
don't
she has
mind.
done.
Yeah, thanks a lot, fam. Thanks,
I'll
Max.
tell you one thing. She gonna see seven. I saw already. Then dropped her a little something already. So
There you
bless
go.
you, Queen, for
Thank
doing
you,
that.
Seven. That's my brother, Seven. And sorry, take me off the big screen though,
Okay.
please.
I don't
Yes.
be showing support. Brother
Yeah.
Lai don't be showing support
Oh, shout out to Brother Law and his
like you do the
beautiful.
marriage, man. Come on, bro.
I'm gonna
Give
meet
the
Miss
cop.
Nicole when I come back to New York. I'm gonna go ahead and mute out and I'll be right back. Sorry.
All right.
And
Brother
and
Lai.
this ain't man or woman worshiping either, brother La. This is giving thanks to brothers and sisters doing a great job and providing a great service. That's what we do,
Right.
and the people are echoing that.
Yeah, I would support, but I just lost my job today. Now I'm just playing.
I was
I,
about to say, brother.
I'm joking.
Oh, I was gonna tell you drop your cash app. I would have been the first one in there, man.
Nah.
There you
If,
go.
if, if, that, if that was really real, I would, try to ask for some help. But I appreciate that, sir.
There
I
you
did
go.
want to say something, but Coach Keith got his hand up, and I'll just go after him.
Coach Keith, what up, brother?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I don't have Cash App, but I do have Zelle. I have all the other things. So if you
You got
got
PayPal?
Zelle, yeah, I got PayPal.
Okay. Nepal, throw your PayPal up in there.
Yeah, that'll
Do the
work.
moderators know Nepal PayPal email address? Okay, we gonna wait till she get back.
But you could just set up your Zelle with just your email address. So if you just set it up with your email, that's an easy way for me to send you
Yeah,
stuff.
I gotta. Damn, I'm slow on this stuff, man. I got Zelle, but I'm slow on this stuff. I got to start doing this thing. I'm
Hey,
the
can I ask old boy a
Yeah, you
question,
missing out
sir?
on money.
I be the one hitting people with the Zelle. You know?
I like Zell the best though. But can I ask your boy? Can I ask the Abo? What's the
Go
brother's
ahead.
name?
Go ahead. Go ahead. Ask your
Let me
question.
ask you this, brother. Is this something that you say as an Indian, something that you take serious? Did you do the genealogy not on just one parent, but on all four of your both of your grandparents on both of your mother's side to see if they were pure Indian? And is there any source or anything that we can show you that you will take into account to look at it reasonably, or is your mind set that you are Indian and forever be an Indian regardless of what we may present to you?
Was that a question for me?
Hello,
Who's the question for, brother?
the Indian brother. I can't see his name.
No,
I don't
there's
know
no
which one.
Indians up here. There's just fake Indians. But go ahead.
Oh,
Who you talking about?
well,
Lucky?
you know the ones that claim Abo or whatever they go by.
Hold on.
Are
Lucky.
there any on the panel?
Lucky, are you an Indian?
Nah, son, not at all, man.
Okay, all right. Who where he at? Oh, he's probably gone. Oh,
Oh man,
Jones, you're an Indian?
Yeah, Jones.
Yes, sir.
All right, there you go. He asked you a question, Jones.
you didn't hear the
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
Joe?
I heard the question. Yes, I have information not on all my relatives, but most of them, yeah. And I have, yes, and I wanted to answer sa.neter, which what he said earlier. I didn't know that. Yes, college education is important, and I know the individual has scholarship in that field what he did, but I have a extensive library of scholars as well, and not all scholars agree on certain topics. So just because I disagree with him, don't mean I have less education than him. I mean, I taught myself how to read, and I read books all day, every day. So I think I'm qualified to disagree with him.
Oh,
Go ahead.
brother, that was
No, I
slick. You
just
didn't
wanted
even
to.
answer the question. He didn't
I,
even
I
answer
no,
my
I
question
answered your
though.
question. I
He,
said I said I got information on ancestry on most of my family members, not all, but most of them,
so,
and I do have
what are
documentation.
the most? Is it two of your grandparents are it full-blooded Indian? One,
I'm three quarters, and
you're
my
three
grandma.
quarters Indian,
I have German. I have German descent.
no African.
No African.
Okay, so if we showed you proof to show that most people who claim to be Indian mostly are either mixtures or falsely have been told falsely that they have Indian in their family. Would you believe any source that we would give you? Would you believe it if it was empirical evidence? Would you believe it?
I mean, I'm gonna have to if it's true.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
I respect that answer, bro.
I,
And at
I, I
least
appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. That means that you're not set in
Show the
that
evidence.
ideology.
Show the evidence.
you know
So
what
I
that
mean,
maybe,
there's
tells
been
me.
plenty of evidence
so maybe,
has been shown. So, I mean, what evidence do you exactly want to know? Because there's been plenty of evidence shown, brother. That's why I'm confused on your stance.
Yodi's not new to the
You're
hey,
space.
asking
He's
hey,
been
me.
around.
You
He's been
asking
brother
me
trolling
Asar,
before.
what question? What specific
you know,
question you asking though?
you gonna talk
You
loud
claim
again,
that
brother Asar?
that you
I
three
just want to
quarters
say one thing,
Indian, but you don't have no African in you. You don't want to take a DNA test, which would be a process to show if you have African.
brother.
You only have genealogy for a part of your family, so you're not taking it seriously to go see if there's any African roots there. So you're making speculation that you have no African blood in you at all, not based off of information, just based off of how you feel about being an Indian, right?
Oh,
Nah, it's
hey,
not how
let
I
me help him
feel. It's
out.
what I've
Let me help you out.
researched.
Yeah. All right.
Because that's exactly what you're
Hey,
doing, young brother.
Is it better for me to
brother,
state my premise so we can have
brother,
a better understanding
Asar,
where I'm
brother,
coming from?
how much is he paying? Hey, Sarnetta, how much is the brother Asar pay? I want to pay just as much as him, so I can just jump in and just. I mean, I'm speaking
Go
lightly.
ahead,
He just
JJ.
No,
when
Asar
he just.
always
All
support,
right,
brother.
damn.
So you can't use Asar. He
Well,
always support the channel all the
well, no,
time.
well, I support. Well, I'm saying I support too, but I figure
Yeah, yeah,
he
but,
feels that he
but
supports, so he gets over talking people. I mean, you got
yeah,
to breathe,
I
brother.
let Asar
So
talk
here's my
because he
point. Here's
support
my point.
wealthy. Asar supports this
Okay, here's
channel.
my point. Okay, okay. I support it too. All right,
Indeed.
with debates, with bringing in people, bringing in new talent, and donations. Okay, but I'm not gonna keep over talking people. I have my hand up, so I'm gonna wait till Asar get done, and then I'm gonna add to the thing because here's the confusion. But I'm gonna let Asar go. Go ahead, brother.
Thank you,
Okay, I
brother.
guess he don't want to go.
And I showed the discipline to show that I was speaking first and you over talking me, first of all, since you want to try to
No,
make these accusations.
no, brother.
Yes, I was
Okay,
speaking to
all
the
right.
brother
Then you
and
win.
you jumped in. And yeah, I know,
Well, you
but
interrupted him. You
it's not
interrupted
about
him. Go ahead.
it's not
No,
even about that. It's about the
let him
information
go.
that we trying to talk about. It's about the
Yeah.
information that we was
Well,
talking
okay.
about, and I was
Well,
discussing to this
right.
young brother.
You ain't gotta be so
I
loud,
thought you
brother.
was gonna let me go, brother. Do
JJ,
you want to speak? I'll let you speak.
go ahead. Asar, just talk, man. Come on.
Yeah, I'm trying to speak to this young brother because I'm trying to give him clarity. He's telling me that he will believe evidence if it comes to his face, and there's more evidence to the fact that he needs to study the more to see that he has African blood than to believe of the three quarters that he knows. He admitted to us that he didn't even try to research the rest of his family to see if there was African blood in him. He doesn't want to do any DNA tests. I'm assuming if he's an abo, I don't know how he feels on DNA. We haven't heard. But I'm assuming as an abo, he doesn't respect the DNA research. All the evidence of how black people got over here, We have dropped scholars. We have shown sources. I don't understand how all this information that's been shown to you in this panel and in this environment to where you can still hold on to the stance of just
Just
being
just
nothing
to
but Indian and not African.
just to interject, I don't believe in the DNA. It's
Okay.
fugazi to me.
Proving my point. So,
Oh,
like I said,
okay.
what evidence can we present to you for you to see otherwise? Because it doesn't seem anything that we would present to you other than going back in time and bringing those people here. And here
DNA,
you go.
DNA,
You know
DNA is
what
the
I'm
only
saying?
proof.
How about I help? How,
DNA is the only proof you have.
yes, sir. Hey, sorry. How about I help the brother out?
No, I
Can
just
can I do that?
outlined a plethora of proofs, brother, not just DNA. DNA was just one example.
Okay.
Where you find this guy? Okay, can I speak, brother? Side? Maybe if you. How about this? I'm be nice. I'm trying because you kind of. Okay, I'm gonna say this. Look, bro. Here's the problem. We have been labeled this. We have been labeled that, like indigenous black men say all the time. So it keeps us confused. Who's to say that the transatlantic slave trade didn't happen? And who's to say that slaves were, I mean, people were taken and put to different part, like kidnapped and taken to other parts of the Americas as well. Both of them can happen at the same time. You see what I'm saying? And with these labels, you say, I'm an African, I'm an American, I'm an African, I'm an Indian. These are labels that they gave to us. So we could be all of that because they put these labels on us, Asar. That's all I'm trying to say, brother. We cannot talk and absolutely say, "Oh, you're not an Indian." If we don't know what we are because they gave us different names and different titles to keep us confused, brother Asar. Do you see what I'm saying? Now we up here arguing
Uh,
about I'm an African or I'm an Indian. Do you see what I'm saying, bro? Can you see that viewpoint?
you
Or
want
is
me
that
to
impossible?
respond, brother? Do you want me to respond, or is that a rhetorical question?
No, I want you to respond.
Okay. I am not telling the brother what he isn't and what he ain't. I'm trying
No,
to get an understanding of why he refuses to say that he has African blood when, by his own admission, he hasn't even investigated if he do so. Right? The discussion isn't about what label he takes and what label he doesn't. It's what if he would get any information about his genealogy and what that label
okay,
falls under. So he's only claiming three-fourths of his genealogy right now, brother. He just told us that.
okay,
So I don't know what
okay.
you
I
was
get you.
getting out of all of what we was discussing, JJ. I know you want to argue. You looking for
No, I
somebody.
don't want to argue, bro. No, I don't.
I mean, yeah. Okay. Well
No,
then,
but I know
let's
I know
just
that
have a
you like to.
let's have sa.neter arguments. Let's be concise
Sa.neter,
with the
how much
information
did
we
this dude
given,
give you?
and let's do the
I'm gonna double
scholarship.
what he giving you because he think because he's paying he get to just overtalk, bro. I will drag you in the ring, bro. I'm trying to
Mm,
be nice.
Man,
Now
you
let me
ain't
ask you this,
dragging
Aside.
nobody. You always
Okay,
sound
so
like a
be
drunk
quiet.
Randy Savage,
Okay,
All right,
bro,
yo,
let me
Sa,
y'all
Sa,
stop,
can I
y'all
pose
stop,
a
man.
and
hold up,
you
Sa, can
complain
I
every
pose a
time when you don't.
hypothesis?
All right, y'all two stop, man. Come
hold
on,
up.
man.
No. You remember you brought him to my
Nah,
face on
man,
that.
I'm not gonna let y'all mess up Nepal's interview, bro. I'm not gonna let nobody mess up her interview. She did a great show. We're gonna have to end the stream, and y'all can do that on another stream, brother. So we ain't doing all that. Come on, man. We had that earlier with you and Unc, and now come on, brother. We ain't doing
Can,
all that.
can I mention
My
something?
apologies, sa.neter. My apologies, brother.
Yeah, it's all right. Come on, go ahead. Q, go ahead, brother.
Yeah, so I just want to talk about something I was being
Right,
spoken
you're
about
right. This
earlier.
ain't the show for that. You're right. Okay, but all I'm saying is we got to look at it
So
like
JJ,
these
you just
labels
started
were put up.
talking. JJ, Q was talking. You just cut right in on him.
Yes, I just want to mention something that was being spoken about earlier. You know, when I think sa.neter that said it when he was talking to Napah about sources and things like that, asking about like where is this guy's sources and things like that. Like this dude is a walk-in source. Dr. Eltis is a walk-in source, and I know that Unc popularized the term "Where's the source? Bring the source." I get all of that, and sources are needed, but not everything needs a source, especially when a person has a body of work. You don't talk to a doctor, a PhD, a professor, and ask them where their sources are. That's just like ridiculous. And we do that way too often. You see what I'm saying?
Way too much.
So not everybody needs a source. You, me, the person down the street, Joe Sixpack, he needs a source. But a doctor, a PhD that's been doing this, the dude is 85 years old. Why would you be asking him for a source about what he's talking about? He's a walking source. You see what I'm saying?
Facts.
Okay, so Jane
Facts.
Elliott,
And
can
to
I
prove
respond
that,
to you?
and to
Okay.
prove that, you see the Abos and everybody use him as a source. They all use
Facts.
him. So with that, y'all, I gotta go. Thank y'all for tuning in. I appreciate that. I don't want to mess up my queen's interview. This was an excellent interview with Napah Shadah, and I don't want nobody to mess up her interview.
And also, King, thank you so much, sa.neter. You made this possible. The HOK. I want to say, like the brother, all the brothers that came in talking about, it was a great interview, and the sisters too. Lord Abba, we definitely will get you in touch with this man. This is beyond just us making sure that we prove that we use the source against people who are trying to discount the slave trade. It's even beyond that. This doctor is a very valuable, invaluable source for us because he's dedicated his life to telling us the truth, that he, at least what he can find about the transatlantic slave trade. So my hat goes off to him. Shout out to the family. Peace to the darkest minds alike. Peace to the HOK family. And peace and black power. Peace to my king, first and foremost. I should have said that. Thank you, son.
Welcome to sa.neter Studios. We don't get no better than consciousness info. sa.neter TV7. You keep it hot 24/7. You got that back for 102. sa.neter TV2. Yeah.
You are now inside sa.neter Studios, the house of consciousness production.